is now in session for this important trial concerning the safety and security of our way of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Judge Mark Skousen is presiding at this hearing. Judge Skousen is a professional economist, author, and producer of FreedomFest, and has had absolutely no experience as a judge, but is the son of a family lawyer and former FBI agent, the late Leroy B. Skousen of Portland, Oregon, and has watched a lot of Perry Mason and Law and Order reruns. All arise.
All rise. What is
Why are you not rising?
I see enough law and order to know when the judge enters, everyone rises. You might need this for a PowerPoint.
Did you want this now?
I think you can stop rising now.
No, sorry, you didn't see that.
Listen, I'm not a money judge. I'm a hanging judge. Hanging judge. All right. All be seated. All be seated, please. All be seated. All right, hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. FreedomFest Court is now in session. I've always wanted to do this. Great, sounds great. All right, we are here for a very important trial concerning the safety and security of our way of life as Americans. We are interested in the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of money. Happiness, sorry. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the jury, we are gathered here in the great sovereign state of Nevada to determine whether the Second Amendment of the Constitution gives complete freedom to the right to bear arms by the citizens of this great country, or whether the advocates of the Second Amendment are responsible for the gun violence that seems to be endemic in the United States. Now, critics of the Second Amendment have warned that the National Rifle Association Gun Owners of America and other advocates of unlimited gun ownership have led to a culture of violence in the United States and have blood on their hands for stopping practical gun control measures on the federal and state level, leading to an unprecedented number of mass killings in schools, businesses, shopping malls, hotels, concerts, and vacation destinations. Defenders of the Second Amendment claim that gun ownership is an American tradition and individual right, both for sport and hunting, and as a fundamental to maintaining liberty as the rights of free speech, a free press, and freedom of religion as dedicated in the Bill of Rights. That firearms are necessary for self-defense from threats ranging from local criminals to crazed mass shooters to foreign invaders. They contend that widespread gun ownership actually deters crime rather than causes more crime. In this trial today, we hope to determine the truth about the Second Amendment and gun control, the causes of increased gun violence in the United States, and how we can return to civility without losing our freedoms. Defending the Second Amendment before this court is Mr. John Lott, Jr., a professional order in the court. Professional economist and world-recognized expert on guns and crime. He holds a PhD in economics from UCLA, has held positions at the Wharton Business School, Stanford, Yale, and the University of Chicago, and was the chief economist at the United States Sentencing Commission. He has published over 100 articles in peer-reviewed journals and written 9 books, the most famous of which is More Guns, Less Crime and The War on Guns. Mr. Lott, will you please stand? As an arch defender of the Second Amendment and the right of private citizens to own guns for the protection of themselves and their families, You have been accused of supporting a culture of violence in America by opposing reasonable gun control laws and thus encouraged a high level of gun violence in the world compared to other civilized nations and a sharp increase in mass shootings around the country. How do you plead, sir?
Not guilty.
Thank you. We will begin our proceedings with a 5-minute opening statement, first from the prosecuting attorney, Mr. Michael Shermer. Mr. Shermer is the founding publisher of Skeptic Magazine, which has over 55,000 subscribers. He is a former columnist for Scientific American and a presidential fellow at Chapman University. He is the author of over a dozen books, including Why Darwin Matters, The Mind of the Market, and his latest book, Heavens on Earth, The Scientific Search for the Afterlife. His 2 TED Talks, seen by millions, was voted in the top 100 of the more than 1,000 TED Talks given. He considers himself a libertarian who, after looking at the evidence, now believes in gun control. Mr. Shermer, welcome to our FreedomFest court.
Thank you, sir.
Now, after their opening statements, we have opening statements from Michael Shermer and then John Lott. Each attorney will call 2 witnesses who will be subject to cross-examination. Afterwards, the jury, very distinguished group, will rule on the case, and if the defendants are found guilty, the judge, that's me, will impose a harsh sentence. I am known as the hanging judge, so be aware. Now, let me give you a few instructions to the jury. You have been selected because you have pled to be impartial. An impartial observer who has not made up his or her mind about gun control and Second Amendment. Agreed? You're all nodding your head? Thank you. You will listen carefully to the opening statements and the testimonies of the witnesses. And at the end of this hearing, you will be required to determine whether there is sufficient evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. John Lott and other advocates of unlimited gun rights are guilty of public malfeasance. The decision will be based on majority rule, and I don't want a hung jury, although I am the hanging judge. So. The decision will be based on a majority vote by the jury and does not have to be unanimous. Is that understood? Yes. And while they are deliberating, you yourself in the audience will get a chance to vote also to see if this jury does represent a democratic process. Now, Mr. Shermer, you may begin with your opening statement. You have 5 minutes. And by the way, please face the audience as well as the jury. Thank you.
And can I have my slides? Hopefully we have those queued up. Yes, there we are. Here we go.
You're ready to
Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Judge.
I will be timing you. Go.
Okay, all right, go. Well, I thought we might first, if I can have we have the slides there in the middle there. I should note that as a libertarian, I am interested in freedom, but I'm also interested in solving social problems. We have a problem, obviously, in the United States, carnage. Close to 40,000 people a year die by gun violence. If this was terrorism, conservatives would suspend the Constitution, except for the Second Amendment, and ramp up big government to solve the problem. But because it's guns, it's somehow different. I thought we should start off with actually seeing what the Second Amendment says. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, that made sense in 1776 when the military weapon of choice was the same as the private weapon of choice. In 2013, the military weapons of choice versus the private weapons of choice were rather different. If the special forces come to your home and you think you're going to stop them with your handgun or rifle, you're delusional. You've been watching too many movies. The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, famously said by Wayne LaPierre. In other words, the NRA's solution to crime and violence is to arm everyone to the teeth and hope the good guys outgun the bad guys. In essence, I have a feeling that slide went the opposite direction I thought it was going to go.
Proceed.
In essence, it's saying that America is a lawless society in which the criminals run the show, so everyone's on their own. Well, if the good guys are well-armed and professionally trained police and military who routinely practice at shooting ranges, then yes, this is one of the many factors that have led to the decline of violence over the past several centuries. But if the good guys means armed private citizens with little to no gun training, this could not be more wrong. You have only to queue up a YouTube video search string of gun accidents and things that go wrong with guns. They're hilarious if they weren't also tragic, of people like these guys shooting themselves. A 2009 American Journal of Public Health study, epidemiologists at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine found that on average, guns did not protect those who possessed them from being shot in an assault. They estimated that people with a gun were 4.5 times more likely to be shot in an assault than those not possessing a gun. Arming everyone to the teeth as a solution to the problem of crime and violence is quite possibly the worst idea anyone has ever had. Number 3, more guns equals less crime. U.S. crime rates are comparable to other Western countries who have few guns. Crimes like car theft, burglary, robbery, sexual assault, aggravated assault, and adolescent fighting rates are similar to those of other high-income countries. But our homicide rates are off the charts higher, orders of magnitude higher. Why? Guns. It's the guns that's the problem.
You have 2 minutes.
Here's a statistical chart here showing the United States as the outlier. On the vertical axis, gun deaths per 100,000 people, which is how the statistics are used in this area. On the horizontal axis, guns per 100 people. You can see that only Mexico is worse than the United States in terms of gun violence. Another study, that was between countries. This is within the United States, between states. The more guns you have in your state, the more people are going to die by guns. It's not rocket science. It's really quite simple why that is. Now, again, I'm not advocating that we suspend the Second Amendment or confiscate everybody's guns. I'm just drawing a causal link between more guns, more gun violence. The crime rates, again, are the same between countries, the same between the states. It's the gun violence that's the problem because of the guns. From this recent Atlantic study last year, I see more gunshot wounds as a trauma surgeon here in the United States per week than I did when I was serving in Kandahar, Afghanistan, said this physician. Gun controls work to reduce violence. These are more lax gun laws to the right, fewer restrictions to the right on the horizontal axis, and the vertical axis is, again, firearm deaths per 100,000 people. It's a super simple linear correlation between more gun control, less gun violence, less gun control, and then more gun violence. Again, no one's talking about taking everybody's guns away. You're already in agreement on lots of gun control measures, such as machine guns, for example. All we're saying is just implement some modest gun control measures. That's a rational way to solve a national crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sherman. Now, Mr. Lott, you have 5 minutes in rebuttal, in defense. Okay. You can stand here or over here, but look at the audience as well as the jurors. Or maybe you'd like to go over here. Might be better.
Okay. Get it right here. Okay, well, thanks very much for having me here. Obviously, this is something that touches all of us. There are a couple of basic questions we have to ask, and that is, if the police can't be there to protect you, do people have a right to be able to go and protect themselves? And also, what's the safest course of action for people to take when they're having to confront a criminal by themselves? I think, and I'll just go and list some other questions here. Why is it that every single time around the world that we've had a gun ban, banning either all guns or all handguns, murder rates have gone up? You'd think out of randomness, you'd find at least one time where it stayed the same or went down. But yet every single time it's gone up. If you look at mass public shootings, virtually every mass public shooting that we have here in the United States, and also the many that they have in Europe that we don't hear too much about, keep on occurring in those places where guns are banned. Why do these terrorists try to pick out those places where they don't have to worry about somebody being able to go and defend themselves. And finally, I'd just like you to think about who's most harmed by gun control. I would go and argue it's the most vulnerable people in our society, the people who are most likely to be victims of violent crime, poor blacks, and people who are relatively weaker physically, women and the elderly. It'd be great if the police were there all the time to protect people, but they're not. Here are just some data on police response times. First of all, you may not always have the luxury of time to be able to go and dial your phone and talk to somebody there. But even when you're able to do that, you look at response times. Dallas, 8 minutes and 39 seconds. Fort Worth, 8 minutes and 54 seconds. Austin, Texas, 8 minutes. Places like Detroit, almost 17 minutes. Miami, 14 minutes, and so on. In rural parts of the United States, it can be you may not even have police services 24 hours a day. Police are extremely important in reducing crime. But police understand themselves that they virtually always arrive on the crime scene after the crimes occurred, and that raises the question what people should do when they're having to confront a criminal by themselves. You can look at surveys of police. Police One, which is the largest private organization of police in the United States with about 450,000 members, when they're asked on a scale 1 to 5, 1 being low, 5 being high, how important do you think legally armed citizens are in reducing crime? 76% of police officers said that they're either extremely important or very important in reducing crime. Do you support concealed carry? Over 90% of police officers in the country support concealed carry.
You have 2 minutes.
Considering the particulars of recent tragedies like Newtown and Aurora, what's the impact of legally armed citizens? 86% of police officers saying getting rid of gun-free zones, allowing people to defend themselves, could have either reduced or eliminated the casualties. You see similar types of results from police chiefs around the country. Every place in the world, not just Washington, D.C. and Chicago, where murders were falling before their handgun ban and rising afterwards, but you can look at places like Ireland, or you can look at Jamaica, which had its gun ban going into effect in '75. Or you can look at Great Britain, where afterwards, over the next 8 years, there was about a 50% rise in homicides and fell after that, but only because at that time they had an 18% increase in the number of police officers. You look across countries, the United States is the red one there. We're below the median, we're below the mean. If you look at homicide rates, and you look at gun ownership rates across countries, and there's real problems. I'm using the Small Arms Survey, and I'll just tell you they won't release their data for about 85% of, or tell you where they got the data. You find a negative relationship. The countries that have higher gun ownership rates have lower homicide rates. And you can look at homicide rates among developed countries. The United States is higher. Here's the relationship between gun ownership and homicide rates across all developed countries. Again, there's a negative relationship between gun ownership and that. Now, I don't put a lot of weight on purely cross-sectional data. That's the reason why I look before and after the changes, because it allows you to try to account for more differences that are there. Thank you very much for your time. But again, if I were to leave you with 2 facts, one is it's the most vulnerable people who benefit the most from being able to own guns, and it's particularly poor blacks and women and the elderly who benefit the most from having the option to be able to go and protect themselves. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lott. Very well done. There you have data on both sides of this issue. So to determine the truth, each attorney now is going to call 2 witnesses, and then they will be cross-examined. This is the best part of our FreedomFest court. So, Mr. Chairman, Michael, please come forward and call your first witness.
I call to the stand Mr. Mark Elliot. Mark, come on up. He sits there, right?
He's right up here.
Yep. No pressure.
Mr. Elliot, yes, would you please place your hand on this New York Times article? After my son was killed in a school shooting, I began fighting for stricter laws. I knew guns were the problem. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you, Michael Bloomberg?
I do.
Please be seated.
Mr. Elliot, thank you so much for being here. Tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you of interest in this subject.
Well, I'm a professional writer, a biographer, specializing in music and film, and many of my subjects have had gun issues in their lives, both real and on screen, and I find that that subject doesn't go away. It's always there in one form or another.
And you're the biographer of Charlton Heston biography.
That's right.
And he was the president of the NRA.
He was, and he was vilified for it in Hollywood. You know, in the public, he was beloved, that word that we always hear about people we like. They're beloved. I don't know what the B means. I know what the love means. But in Hollywood, in the business area, he was not liked because they felt, I think some people felt that he crossed the line between being a hero in the movies and imagining himself a hero in real life.
And he famously held up that rifle and said, "From my cold, dead hands." So he was not acting there. He really believed in the Second
Oh, he
Amendment.
believed, he was committed. That speech was actually premeditated. It wasn't a sudden moment of inspiration. And it came from an earlier speech, I think around the turn of the century, that he had come across. He was a great reader. And he saw it, loved it, and like all actors, stashed it away to use it at the right time.
See, and he did. So we're often, most of us get our information or images about what gun violence is like from the movies.
Absolutely.
How accurate is that?
Very accurate, too accurate. When I grew up as a kid in New York City, on the streets of the city, I wanted to have a double six gun like Hopalong Cassidy. I didn't know what guns were. I just knew that I wanted to look like someone who was a hero.
But you always see these, you know, where they shoot and then they get shot in the hand and they go like this and they just sort of wave it off. It's
No
not
bullets.
These are bullets. It's not like a
Air
slap in the
coming
hand.
through.
Yeah. And you have a connection with some gun violence in your own personal life, I understand.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
When you're on the other side of a gun, your thinking about it is less phallic than fatal. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time and shot in the back. And just the grace of God and good fortune, I survived when I was in college. I had nothing to do with what was going on. But when you get shot, it's not like in the movies where someone puts a bandage on you and the next scene it's gone, you're healed. It stays with you. It traumatizes your body and sometimes your mind, and it makes you rethink about what guns can do.
Yeah. So this was something of a random act. Would it have made a difference if you had you were packing heat, you had a gun in your holster?
I don't think it would have made a difference. I probably wouldn't have used it anyway, because I think if you pull a gun out and you don't know how to use it, what you're doing, if you've never shot anybody, you may wind up doing more harm to yourself than
Yeah. Have you shot a gun before?
many times.
Yes. It's a very visceral experience. It's
It
not
is.
at all like in the movies.
It cost me my hearing in one ear for about a month. You know, it's an exciting feeling to have power, but I always worry what's going to happen. You know, everything shrinks in size. What's going to happen when nuclear weapons are able to be carried around in your
Right.
pocket? Are you going to nuke people because they banged your car from the rear?
I think even the NRA would not endorse small hip size on in your pocket nuclear weapons.
One more minute.
But clearly we have a national problem. Again, as I said, more people are killed by guns. This is suicide, homicide, and accidental deaths than are killed in automobiles. We've made great progress in reducing the number of people killed per miles driven and so on. Why, in your opinion, have we seen this increase in gun violence over the decades?
I think the movies, TV have glorified guns. What we need to do, I think the best form of gun control is de-glorify having guns. A lot of kids today in ghettos and poorer neighborhoods see the gun as a weapon of power, of influence. And it's really not, but they feel it is, and it gives them the strength of an illusion of freedom. And that comes, I think, from the movies. De-glorify guns, keep the gun control.
Thank you, Mr. Elliot. Your witness, Mr. Lott.
Okay. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Lott, to see if Mr. Elliot favors gun control.
Don't shoot me, I'm only the piano player.
Okay. Well, there are probably plenty of people armed here, so you're probably safe. Anyway,
or a target.
Anyway, it's an honor to be talking to you. I've read a few of your books.
Thank you.
So you think that the media portrays guns fairly accurately? I mean, I recently was going through and looking at TV shows, for example, and just in the last year, you can find dozens of shows that show machine guns being used in kind of normal cop-type settings. Do you know how many murders have been committed with machine guns in the United States since 1930?
I'm sure the answer is too many or none.
Well, it's 2, which is probably still too many. But I'm just wondering, do you really think that the media has given an accurate portrayal there? It seems like they want to sensationalize. Let me ask you this. You say it glorifies it. I can easily find lots of cases where police or military people use guns in good ways on TV shows. I've been looking in vain for like the last 7 years or so on TV shows about civilians using guns to defend themselves or others in good ways. There are lots of cases where TV shows show them doing mistakes, accidentally shooting other people or causing problems for the police. But can you think of many cases in TV shows over the last few years where people have used guns, civilians have used guns legitimately in good ways to defend themselves?
Well, I think all the Western TV shows had this idea that the shootout was the way to settle differences.
Okay, I'm saying like the last decade.
I guess Law and Order, I mean, I'm not that much of a TV watcher, but in Law and Order, there's usually somebody who has tried to take the law in his own hands.
Well, that's not good. I'm saying using somebody, because almost all the people that use guns in Law and Order are committing a crime, okay? But I'm just saying somebody using a gun. Anyway, my guess, if people were to look, they would have a hard time going and finding that.
Well, my position about the media, I don't mean journalism. That's, I think, a separate issue. I'm talking about entertainment. We don't look to learn what to do morally in films or TV. It's a cultural effort.
But you were saying it was realistic, and you said an accurate portrayal.
It's a cultural portrayal, not an historical portrayal.
Okay. Well, okay. Now, you were mentioning in your own life or speculating with others about all the problems that might arise when people use guns defensively. I can give you, over the last 5 years or so, literally several dozen cases where, according to police, mass public shootings have been stopped as a result of a civilian with the permanent concealed handgun. How many of those cases have the types of concerns that you've raised occur? How many times have they accidentally shot the wrong person?
I think, first of all, you have to ask them, and secondly, talk to their families. We send soldiers out with guns.
I'm just saying, but let's specifically deal with this problem. You mentioned things that can go wrong, and I'm giving you examples. I'm saying, can you give me one example of a mass public shooting that was stopped by a concealed carry permit holder where any of the types of concerns that you were raising have actually occurred? One example. Can you give me one example?
Objection, Your Honor. He's leading the witness. He's not a historian of all television shows. He's a biographer.
Well, I thought he was brought in as an expert on the media.
I'll allow the question. Objection overruled. You need to watch more TV,
That's
Mr. Elliot.
the solution.
Law and Order.
That's what I watch when I can't sleep. And I try to figure out what the plot is. Who did what? Who's on trial? Who's the real bad guy? I think gun violence is symbolic on TV and sometimes in the movies because nobody gets hurt except the bad guys. The good guys get wounded. The bad guys get killed.
Well, you don't think people with guns are often shown as buffoons or as causing problems with the police? I can give you a number of recent shows. I mean, you look at The Rookie, for example, on ABC. They're constantly showing cases where civilians are getting in the way of police officers. They show them as racist, the people that have guns. You don't
I'm not sure that's a good thing. I'm not sure that
right.
that's a good thing.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. You may sit down now. Thank you very much, Mr. Elliot. Appreciate it very much. You're a good man. I've read your book, but I'm objective.
Thank you.
I'm an objective judge.
You're the one.
Mr. Shermer, call your second witness, please.
I call Raya Dabdoub, captain of the Slovenian national debate team.
Now we're talking.
Ms. Dabdoub, please place your hand on this book, We Say Never Again, a report written by Parkland student journalists after a mass shooting at Douglas High School in Florida, killing 17 students and teachers. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you Jim Brady?
I do.
Thank you. Please be seated.
Raya, you are our youngest star witness, perhaps in the history of FreedomFest mock trials. Yes. Where did you go to school?
I went to school in Slovenia at Gimnazija Bežigrad, but I'm continuing my studies in the Netherlands in the field of psychology and neuroscience.
So your English is very good. You probably know something of American culture.
I hope so.
Well, this gets us to this debate on guns. You have debated guns in your country. Tell us a little bit about what gun control measures are like. How many people have guns in your country? What difference does it make? And what are your observations of the American problem?
Well, the thing is that Slovenia is a relatively safe country. We've had 0 mass shootings and 0 school shootings. And I'd say the reason for American, in a way, obsession with gun violence is they respond fundamentally different in a different way to gun violence than other countries do. You know, there was an example of Australia when there was a mass shooting in 1996 in Tasmania. 35 people died. Afterwards, they changed the legislation, banned semi-automatic weapons and assault rifles. Afterwards, 0 mass shootings. So America, in a way, responds with more armament.
Did you say 0?
0.
You mean like none?
None.
And how many people in your country have guns? I mean, is it like every other person is packing heat?
Very few. I haven't heard of a person that owns a gun.
Right. So, as an outsider who's debated this issue, when you look at the American laws, the Second Amendment, and then all the different gun control measures across the different states and so on, what, in your opinion, is the right amount of gun control, given the fact we're not going to confiscate every last gun and so forth?
Well, certainly more than there is now, you know. There is no correct answer to this, but what we could say is that just what Australia did was quite successful, you know. Background checks, limiting amount of guns someone can have, all of these measures are in comparison better than what is happening now.
Yes, and so for example, other proposals are banning assault rifles, the number of weapons you can have, reasons why perhaps you want to own them, the size or the number of bullets that can be shot at one time. What else on that front?
Mr. Lott, didn't you want to object to the term assault weapons?
I'll let him go. I think those people in the audience know the problems with it. So.
Oh, okay. Proceed. Just trying to help out.
In your observations of American culture, what is the seeming obsession with guns that Americans have that no one else seems to have in the world?
Well, in the States, there is this idea of armed citizenship. Is the idea, the fantasy of a good guy with a gun, you know, that's being propagated. Oh, the good guy will come and save you. But in reality, statistics show that guns are 22 more times more likely to be used in homicides, criminal assaults, and suicides than in self-defense. So this idea of self-defense doesn't really happen in the real life as much as you think.
Right, so you're citing an important study there that was done. It's not that it never happens. Occasionally a good guy with a gun will shoot a bad guy with a gun. But you're 22 times more likely to shoot yourself, your spouse, your children find it, the children's friends find it. Somebody is deeply depressed, they kill themselves with a gun. You can kill yourself other measures, but it's much harder, and you're more likely to screw up. With a gun, you're less likely to screw up on that. So that's an important study. What other studies do you bring in to bear on this debate?
Well, the fact is that homicide is 40% more likely to occur in a household that owns guns, and suicide is 243% more likely to occur in those kind of households.
Right. So again, we're not saying you shouldn't have a gun. Go ahead and have a gun if you want in your house. Just recognize that you are taking a risk, that something will go wrong. Do guns ever accidentally kill people through cleaning them or at gun ranges and so on?
Oh, yes, certainly.
Yeah. So this is the problem we're facing, I think. And again, just finally, kind of a reflecting as somebody from not in America, just kind of looking at what we've been talking about, the gun culture, the movies, how realistic it is, that most Americans have this image, as you described, the good guy will shoot the bad guy with the gun. Again, in your opinion, what is the obsession, this image, this almost fetishization of guns in America?
Well, I think that it's, to an extent, being sold to people in order to, sell more guns. This idea of you will be heroic, you will save yourself and save others. And I think that because of this propagation, people are more likely to arm themselves and stockpile guns and feel as if this will make them heroes, when in reality, as I said, that doesn't really happen.
Yeah, when President Obama was talking about it, gun sales went up, ammunition rates went up. So there does seem to be something different about the American culture in that sense. Now, finally, you've debated both sides of this issue. Give us your honest opinion. Here's the set of arguments from people like Mr. Lott, a set of arguments from people like myself. What, in your opinion, is the correct balance or answer for this? Reducing the carnage is what we want to do.
I think what people oftentimes misunderstand is that trying to regulate guns is not anti-guns, it's not taking guns away. I am, in a way, I would let people have guns as far as there are background checks and regulations, but there really has to be more regulation in comparison to now.
Right. Any final comments from your research on this area that you'd like to add?
Well, I would just like to point out that the normalization of guns and school shootings and mass violence that is happening here is really a unique phenomenon. And as an outsider, it's really something that is quite odd and not as normal in other parts of the world.
People in Europe must just look at these pretty much weekly mass public shootings and just shake their heads in disbelief. What is going on over there?
Yeah. My parents were actually concerned I'm going to Las Vegas because there was a shooting here.
Well, that's right. Yes. Yeah, right. Yeah, the largest mass public shooting. Time. Thank you so much. Mr. Lott?
Thank you. Lott, your witness.
Well, thanks very much. It's an honor to have such a top debater here. I was kind of wanted to dive in a little bit to some of the claims that you're making. So you were telling us that people are 22 times more likely to die from a gun, either suicide or shooting somebody that they know, than to use it in self-defense. Do you know where those self-defense numbers are from? Do you realize that they're from the justifiable homicides from the Department of Justice? And do you realize that about over 90% of the counties in the United States do not report those numbers, and that there's actually a warning that's been put on there saying you should not use those numbers for statistical purposes because most of the country doesn't report those numbers? And so the reason why you get such a low estimate in terms of the number of self-defenses is that the vast majority of the country doesn't even report the numbers that you're using. You realize?
This was not really a question, but the statistics are out of Mr. Sherman's
Well,
studies.
Sherman knows the problem. I'm disappointed that he didn't try to help you.
Well, I think you're again you're playing a numbers game.
You're not using my time. Sorry, Michael.
Objection.
You had
Order in the court.
You had the chance to correct her numbers beforehand.
There's no numbers to be corrected.
This can't count to my time going back and forth with him.
John Lott is sustained on this move.
Okay. But why would you use a number that isn't even counted in over 90% of the country, doesn't even count it? And beyond that, I don't know if you realize this, but even the ones that do report it have real problems, because when they initially record a homicide, when it's maybe 2 or 3 years later that they determine it's a justifiable homicide, most police departments don't go back and correct those earlier numbers. So even the few percent that report it are underestimating the number of justifiable homicides in there.
As far as I know, we're not here to debate one specific statistic.
No, but I'm just saying, I'm happy, if I had an hour, I'd go through all the statistics that you had. But let's take the other claim that you had about homicides and suicides, the rate that they occur in the home by having a gun. That's based on work by Arthur Kellerman. I don't know if you're familiar with that or actually read the papers, but what he does in those studies is they will go and ask a group of the relatives of somebody who died in or near a residence and ask them whether a gun was owned in the home. And then they assume if a person died from a gunshot and a gun was owned in the home, it was that gun used in the death. Do you realize that even including suicides, 86% of those deaths were actually due to a weapon brought in from the outside?
Well, sir.
And not from the gun in the home?
This is a final question, although it didn't sound like a question, but go ahead.
No, I'm saying, do you realize that? Because it's not what you think the number.
Your Honor, where is this going?
Objection sustained.
Again, you're taking my time up, Michael.
Make a final statement.
Look, just if you look at the logic, once you have a gun in a household, whether it's brought in or whether it's owned, this normalizes seeing a gun. This normalizes usage of a gun.
That doesn't mean something bad happens relative to the benefits.
Well, this makes it more likely for accidents to happen.
Okay. I want to get back a minute from Michael earlier.
You actually had time. We really have run out of time. So you have to finish up and make your point later. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So I assume the prosecution has rested. You have no further witnesses?
We are well rested.
It's understandable. All right, so now, Mr. Lott, you have your chance to call your 2 witnesses. Please call your first witness.
Carl Moody, please.
Professor Moody, will you please place your hand on this copy of the Cato Pocket Constitution? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about the Second Amendment, so help you the NRA?
Yes, I do.
Please be seated.
Proceed.
Carl, could you tell people a little bit about your background?
I'm a professor of economics at the College of William and Mary. Go Tribe.
You gotta get closer.
Go Tribe. And I teach econometrics and mathematical economics.
Okay.
Even closer?
Yeah.
And I teach mathematical economics and statistics.
Okay. Now, I wanted to ask you a few questions. We just heard that the United States is unique in terms of mass public shootings. Could you tell me, you've done research on this.
Yes, I have.
What has been your findings and what problems exist with that claim? Is that claim true?
No, that claim is not true. Around the world, there are mass public shootings all the time, hundreds of them, and we just never hear about them.
So what's the percentage of mass public shooters that the United States makes up in the world?
A couple of percent, maybe.
And how does that compare to our share of the world population?
Very tiny. I mean, it's really a very small proportion of the world population.
So we make about 1% of the shooters, but about 4.6% of the world population.
That is correct.
Okay. And are there countries in Europe that have much higher rates of mass public shootings than we have here in the United States?
Finland, for example.
Okay. How about France?
France.
Now, doesn't France have all the different types of gun control laws that they were just talking about?
Yes, they do.
Okay, how about Russia? Doesn't Russia have all the different types of gun control laws that they were just talking about?
Yes, very strict.
And how about Belgium?
Oh, very strict.
And don't those countries... Now, one of the problems that maybe exists with the claims is that they're not adjusting for population. They're just seeing the United States, we have 327 million people, and so they're counting up the number of mass public shootings here, and they're comparing it to a country like Belgium or to France or other. Is that the way people normally make comparisons across countries in terms of crime rates?
Not if they're doing it correctly.
What's the correct way of doing it?
Per capita.
Right. So we wouldn't just compare the number of murders in Nevada to California and say California is higher because it has more murders, right?
No, that'd be stupid.
Okay. All right. Well, just trying to be clear here. Can you tell me one place in the world that's banned guns, either all guns or all handguns, and seen murder rates go down or even stay the same?
There is no such place.
What happens every time when
Stay the same or go up.
Okay. And why they always go up? Why do they always go up? What would be the theory for why banning guns don't produce a benefit?
Because only bad guys have guns, and you are helping the assailant and hurting the victim.
Okay. You would think out of randomness, once or twice, you would get a drop in crime. Doesn't that tell you something, that with all the places that have banned guns, that you can't find one place where it's gone down? And why would that be preferable, to kind of look at the change before and after, rather than the type of cross-country comparisons that we've been hearing about?
Because in a before and after comparison, you're using the same place. Whereas if you're looking at cross sections, you're looking at different places that have thousands of things different between them. For example, in the slide that Mr. Shermer showed, across states, Wyoming was high and had and Massachusetts was low. I can't think of two states that are very much different, that are more different than that from each other.
One more question.
Okay. Who is hurt the most by the different types of gun control regulations? We've been hearing things about background checks. What are some of the things about background checks, the way they're run right now, and who gets hurt?
Well, first thing, they're expensive to run, and the people who are trying to buy a gun usually have to pay for the background check. And very likely that if you have a name that's similar to somebody else's name, you will fail, and the names that are most likely to come up are names of poor black people, and they get denied handguns.
Okay, time.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Okay, you're a witness.
Whoa!
Oh no,
You still got.
Oh, no.
Cross-examination.
Oh, no.
Now you're in big trouble.
Mr. Moody, do you agree we have a problem that needs to be solved? That is to say, close to 40,000 people a year die by gun. Do you consider that a social problem that needs to be addressed?
No.
You don't?
No, I don't.
You're good with 40,000 people dying?
The crime, both the homicide rate and you're mixing up homicides and suicides.
Yeah, gun violence. I'm just talking about gun violence of all kinds.
Homicides and suicides, both of which are going down.
No, they're not. They're both. Okay. They're all going down. They're all going down since the 1993 with the overall decline of violence of all kinds. Here we're just talking about, is there a problem to be solved? Would you be okay with 400,000 people dying by guns every year? Where do you draw the line?
I don't know how that would happen.
Oh, easily.
Easily?
Just keep arming everybody, as we showed. Now, Mr. Lott asked you if you're familiar with any place, as he said, can you name one place where guns have been banned that has seen its murder rate fall? You answered no. Okay, not ban, not gun bans, but are you familiar with the Austrian government in 1997 tightened its legislation on firearms to match that of the EU countries, required minimum age of 21 years old, required background check, required proof of safe firearm storage, 3-day cooling off period, required reasons given for firearm purchase must be provided, and psychological testing before obtaining handguns, semi-automatic firearms, and repeating guns. That showed a dramatic decline in gun violence. Are you familiar with that study?
No, but I wanted to see what kind of control variables they use to control for all the other things that are happening before and after that particular law was put into place.
That's fair enough. I recommend it's in the British Journal of Psychiatry 2007. I'll send you the link to that. There's tons of data showing that, again, not confiscating every last gun, not gun bans, but just tightening up the restrictions. Asking people, why do you want a gun? What kind of gun? What are you going to use it for? What's your background? Have you had any restraining orders? Those sorts of things. Don't you see that as kind of reasonable controls to have on guns?
No, I find it onerous.
Onerous. So you think just any old wingnut should have a gun? No training, they could be mentally ill. They could have half a dozen restraining orders by their girlfriend or spouse. You're okay with that guy having a gun running around?
No, I'm not okay with that guy having a gun and running around. But those are not, that person is not the typical gun owner. Typical gun owner is a very serious, very careful, very well-trained person on the range and so forth.
Yeah, not so much. Not very many of them spend every week or once a month training and practicing.
I know
the good ones do, but most don't.
I know a lot of gun owners, and they are all very serious about
Yeah, I know a lot too, and they're not. So again, we know people. And again, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Moody. Excellent job. All right, Mr. Lott, call your final witness, please.
Could George Morris please come up? Kind of wish I was a witness here, but anyway.
Will you please place your hand on this copy of John Lott's book, More Guns, Less Crime? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you Donald J. Trump?
I do that.
Please be seated.
Thanks very much for being here, George. Do you carry?
Yes.
Why do you carry a concealed handgun? You got to put your microphone up to me.
I carry because I want to be protected. Mine's a different story. The gentleman back there that was shot,
Right.
he has an entirely different outlook than I do. I was a Marine officer. I've been an airline pilot. I was shot in the back twice. I'm not supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be dead. An EMT told the policeman that saved my life, don't waste your time. He's going to not make it. My wife was shot, and I was shot trying to protect her. I saw her die. I think that more people should carry guns. Had more people had guns when my wife was murdered and I was shot, it probably wouldn't have happened. Okay. Had we had honest politicians who were looking out for their public who elected them rather than themselves. I was shot at the Tucson shooting in January 9th, 2011. Something that very few of you probably are aware of. I have a medal that says I'm a hero. I'm not a hero. I didn't do anything that any one of you men wouldn't have done. I was told I did because there were men that cringed and cried. I was also told when I was awarded that medal that Gabrielle Giffords was warned numerous times by the person that wrote to her to not have these meetings without security. Okay. Had there been security, there may not have been my wife may not have been dead and I may not be here.
So George, you were here at that horrible event. Do you think that if somebody had had a permanent concealed handgun that they might have been able to stop the attack or at least lessen how many people were harmed?
Absolutely. I think that had there been people armed, and in that day, unfortunately, I wasn't. I had an entirely different outlook on what was going to happen. It was not well organized. There was no security. I thought there would be security, as most of you would suspect. But our Congresswoman put all of her constituents' lives at risk because she had been told she had too many death threats against her. If I'd have been carrying, there wouldn't have been as many deaths. If others had been carrying, there wouldn't have been as many deaths.
Now, let's say there had been a deputy sheriff that was there with a gun. Would he have had certain difficulties that maybe, let's say, somebody with a concealed carry permit wouldn't have had in terms of stopping this attack?
No, I don't think he would have. It's
would the attacker maybe have tried to shoot him first? Whereas if it was somebody with a concealed carry permit, he wouldn't have known who to go and shoot first?
The man that shot me and killed my wife, I don't hold malice against him. he was off his meds.
Right, no, I'm not
And
asking.
I think that
Right.
had there been sheriffs there, they would have immediately taken down the killer. His aim, first thing, was to shoot Gabrielle Giffords, and they would have taken him down.
But if you had somebody in uniform, might he have tried to shoot the people that he knew had guns first before he went after her? Isn't that normally what happens in these types of mass public shootings when you have somebody in uniform there?
I'm not sure. To be honest with you, John, I'm not sure.
Okay. What's your expertise?
Well, I was a Marine fighter pilot. I have been through front sight shooting school, probably the biggest in the country.
And you were there before the shooting had occurred?
Before and after.
Right.
Okay.
All right. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
You're a witness? Sherman.
Well, I'm sorry that happened to you.
God had a reason.
That's a different debate. For me, anyway.
I'll take it on.
One of my witnesses was also shot. He lucked out. Just a lot of the time, these things do turn on chance. Is there a difference between having armed, professionally trained guards at an event like that versus just you hope the people in the audience have guns to hopefully shoot correctly the bad guy? Do you see a difference between that?
I'm not sure what you're asking me.
Is there a difference between professionally trained armed guards and the random citizen just in the audience and you hope that they know what they're doing?
That's obvious, is it not?
I hope so. Yeah, that's right. That's right. And that's what we're talking about here. Is,
no, it isn't.
Is not mass public shootings is not the problem. As much media attention as they get, the number of people that die in mass public shootings is in the statistical noise compared to homicides, suicides, and accidental deaths. The problem is can we, first of all, let me ask you, is that a problem? Do you see that as a problem? Nearly 40,000 people die by guns every year. Do you see that as a social problem that needs addressing?
Well, you made a statement right when you started that irritated the hell out of me. You called me delusional. I remember as a child, that's how you started out. As a child, they said, figures don't lie, but then it goes on. Well, you've used a lot of figures. I have a lot of figures too. 80 times more people are saved by handguns by citizens than are killed by citizens. Mm-hmm. The police, over 50% of felons are more worried about armed citizens than they are police. Every state that's had open carry or concealed weapon permits have seen their rates go down. You didn't mention that. You put a lot of stuff up there. I'll give you those same statistics that refute what you said.
In 1934, the National Firearms Act banned the manufacture and sale of machine guns backed by the NRA. Do you agree that gun control on machine guns was a good idea?
I can't comment. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I know friends that have machine guns.
Doug Casey, he's one of them.
All right. Do any of these...
How many of you, by the way, by show of hands, have machine guns? Quite a few hands have gone up. Assault rifles. Okay.
Do you want to ask that?
Sorry.
Do you want to ask that question of how many are packing heat right now?
No. We already know a bunch of them, including this witness. So.
Do any of the following moderately proposed gun control measures make sense to you? Ban military-style assault weapons. Ban high-capacity magazines. Universal background check for people like the person that shot your wife. Close the gun show loophole. Penalties for illegal gun trafficking. Ban high-risk individuals from guns. Ban sales to dangerously mentally ill people, and research on funding gun violence. Do any of those seem reasonable?
We have some of those laws in place. The man that shot me and killed my wife, they knew he shouldn't have had a gun, but he wasn't in the gun base. We've got the laws. If we pass them, or if we just follow what we have now, which we're not doing, if we got rid of a lot of attorneys so people were willing to testify, it would solve a lot of problems.
I object to that statement.
By the way, I forgot to make the point in my opening statement that if you're really worried about the government, don't get a gun, get a lawyer. Because if you get in a shootout with a government agent, you're going to lose. But they fear more lawyers than they do guns, because then they have to appear in court and explain why they did what they did to you. That's just a little aside. So I would agree with you, sir, that the gun control measures that we already have, if they would be enforced, this would help reduce the carnage. In other words, I think having more people die by guns than by cars is a problem that needs to be addressed. Do you agree?
I'm not sure of that either. I think more people die by cars. More people die by knives.
No, sir, they don't die. More people don't die by
Look
it's close to 40,000 last year by guns. Again, suicide, homicide, accidental gun deaths.
And more were saved by people who had guns than were saved by the police.
But again, don't you? If we are a law-abiding country based on the Constitution and the rule of law, doesn't this line of reasoning go against that? That is, just arm everybody because it's last guy standing is the winner. Every man for himself. Just shoot them out.
I think that John had a good point. Let's think about that. Let's do it so that the guy who goes to get the gun, who doesn't have the $125 or $150 or whatever it is for a background check, so he says, "The hell with it." He goes and steals one.
Right. And they're readily available. You can get them.
Judge, I have a question for Mr. Morris. So we had a terrible mass killing here in Las Vegas a couple years ago that are quite remembered in this town.
Oh, absolutely.
Was there any way to prevent something like this happen? What would you propose?
I really don't know enough about it, Mark. I don't know what his background. And quite frankly, I'm not sure that I trust the liberal press, what they put out about him. Therefore, do we really know that he should not have had a gun? Do we really know that had the procedures been followed, he wouldn't have had guns? I don't know enough about his background that I trust to know.
Yeah. Fair enough. Again, and my final point of the whole line of thinking here is not mass public shootings that get all the media, because not that many people die total. It's just gun violence in general, almost 40,000 last year. I can't see how anybody cannot see that. That's a problem that needs to be addressed. Can we at least reduce the carnage somehow without taking away everybody's guns, but just some moderate regulations? That's what I'm after. Do you agree it seems at least reasonable?
It's probably your idea of what's moderate and what my
Well, I gave you my list there. Military-style weapons,
Why not
bump
admit that the
stocks.
regulations may cause more deaths?
Well,
Right.
okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you, Mr. Morris.
Sure, Mark.
Appreciate very much his testimony. So do you have any further witnesses, Mr. Lott?
No, but I wouldn't mind saying something.
Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have heard expert witnesses in the statements of both the prosecution and the defense. It is now up to you to decide the guilt or innocence of Mr. Lott, John Lott, and other gun rights advocates as defenders of the Second Amendment. It is your job to determine whether their preponderance of evidence supports the prosecution. That is, that on net balance, the advocates of the Second Amendment have encouraged a culture of violence in the United States and have unnecessarily blocked reasonable gun control legislation on the federal, state, and local level. Or whether the evidence supports the defense. That is, on net balance, the supporters of gun rights should not be held responsible for irresponsible use of firearms, and the Second Amendment should be reaffirmed as an essential right of all Americans without restriction. So, the foreman, do you have a foreman? Okay, the foreman will tally the votes, so you have check either guilty or not guilty. The decision by the jury can be determined by majority vote. does not require unanimous decision. Is that clear, and are there any questions? And while they're deciding this, our marshal is going to come forward and show you how you here in our court can also vote on who do you think won this court trial.
So we have the instructions up there on the main screen. If you would like to participate in the voting, it is a two-step process. First, you will text FF19 to 22333 as written up there. Once you have gotten into the system, after you text FF19 to 22333, text your verdict to the same number. You will text A if you think the defendant is guilty of fostering a violent culture and blocking gun control. Text B if you think the defendant is not guilty. So up there you have all the instructions if you want to participate, and we will put those results on the board in a moment. If anyone has been attending Anthem Film Festival and has been voting in the Anthem Film Festival, you may get a response, a dialogue box pop up, and it will say that it's going to allow you to leave. So just select confirm that you will leave.
They need to put in the message box, leave.
Okay, so you need to text leave. If you have previously voted at FreedomFest, text leave first and then go back and follow those instructions.
Does everybody follow the instructions and have done so? Okay, has the jury reached a verdict? All right, stand. And can we now have the defense attorney, John Lott, and both his star witnesses, Carl Moody and George Morris, please stand and face the jury.
Can you help me with bail?
Mr. Foreman, please read the verdict. We find the defendants not guilty. And what is the vote? 10 to 2. Oh my goodness. All right, Mr. Lott. You and your witnesses and supporters of the Second Amendment have been found not guilty. Well, actually, before I read this, let's find out what was decided by our audience.
Can they overrule the jury?
Not guilty. 83%. Pretty impressive. All right, Mr. Lott, you and your supporters of the Second Amendment have been found not guilty and are therefore free to go and enjoy a night in the wild, wild west of Las Vegas, known as Sin City, with the highest crime rate in the country, where you will receive a free one-year pass to enjoy tax-free casino gambling and strip clubs, to retain your open carry gun license, and to fire your weapons at will without any concern of race, color, or creed. Case closed. Good night.